Hi guys, it's Haf, and I thought that this year I would do something a little bit different, which was include some other types of reviews other than just makeup and nail polish reviews. So the first review I'm going to do is on this book, which is Grey by E.L. James. This is the same writer who wrote the 50 Shades of Grey series. I have read all of those books, I have to admit, so that's why I wanted to read this one. I know it's very controversial, the whole storyline thing, and I get a little peeved at people who make judgment calls on something that they've clearly not read, or they've only read like the first one and they haven't read the other two, which are actually kind of important to read to understand where she was going. I do know it was fanfic for Twilight. That's beside the point. So Grey is written from Christian's point of view. It's written differently to how she wrote the 50 Shades of Grey. There's a lot of in his head stuff, which is frankly kind of annoying on the whole. I kind of liked it, but I kind of didn't like it. It's kind of like how I felt about 50 Shades of Grey. There are aspects of it that I quite enjoyed. I'm quite able to separate fantasy from reality, so even if a relationship that appears to be an abusive relationship is happening in a book, sometimes you gotta look past that to, what the hell is going on? The thing that I liked most, probably, about this is that there is a relatively good viewing of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what Christian has. And it is quite clearly talked about in the other books. It's a lot more clearly talked about in this book, and there's a lot more of his internal dialogue stuff, which, as someone who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, I can tell you, whilst everybody's experience is different, the way that it manifests itself in him is actually quite common, and I can understand it. So I can understand his deep need to control everything around him as much as he possibly can, and how he can overreact to what other people consider to be quite minor things. And also the punishment aspect, about wanting to punish other people, particularly if they happen to remind you of the person who you feel was your abuser. So, if you haven't read the other books, you probably don't really know what I'm talking about, but this basically ends about the same time as probably almost halfway through the second book. It's not really congruent with the first book alone. I have also watched the movie, more because I just wanted to see how they would go about it. I know the movie was classed to be probably one of the worst movies of 2015. You do realise there are two more of them, because there are two more books, so there will be two more movies. I didn't mind the movie. It wasn't great. It didn't stick with the book properly. There were some aspects that weren't even included in the movie, which I think the Crazy Ex would have been a really important thing to put in, because it has a lot to do with what happens in the second book. There are references to it in this book, so yeah, it's kind of interesting. If you've read 50 Shades of Grey and you spent the whole time thinking what an arse Christian is, then I suggest you actually read this. He's really not a bad guy. He's just a really messed up guy. As he says, he's 50 shades of fucked up. And that is seriously very true. That's because he's mentally ill. That's where my biggest issue with this whole thing comes from, is the idea that if you are into BDSM, you must be mentally ill. I know a few people who are members of the BDS community, and I can tell you they are not mentally ill. It is just a lifestyle preference. People choose to be goths. Everybody assumes that they're depressed. I know some people who aren't depressed who are goths. The judgment that mental illness makes you do things that are beyond the norm, that pisses me off. As someone who's mentally ill, just because you're into kinky shit does not mean you're mentally ill. It means that is your preference. And that is the thing that has pissed me off the most about the whole 50 Shades of Grey and this book, is that E.L. James has put herself in that position of being one of those people who says that in order for you to be a member of the BDS and like that stuff, you have to be mentally ill. Because, yeah, spoiler alert if you haven't read the books, as he becomes better, he stops doing that stuff. He doesn't want to, do it anymore. That makes it look like his mental illness is making him do it. And, maybe in his case, the punishing people thing is because he's mentally ill, but people on the whole who are members of the BDS community are not like that. It is not about mental illness. It is not, they don't do it because they're mentally ill. They do it because that's what they like. And why the hell shouldn't they? They're not hurting anybody else. Those people are 100% committed to their relationships, and they are consenting adults. And from the point of view of someone who has a mental illness and someone who is friends with people who are in the BDS community, it offends me that that is the idea, that you have to be mentally ill to do that kind of stuff. So that's really the only thing that I've ever been really pissed off about in these books. I know from my own experience that people who are mentally ill may do things that other people would consider abnormal, but then there are people who are not mentally ill who do some really, really horrible, terrible things, and people say, oh, well, they must be mentally ill. Mental illness does not make you a bad person. It is just, it's a medical condition. Does having diabetes make you a bad person? Because seriously, they're both medical conditions, doesn't make you a bad person. And I think that that is the thing, that people who are authors and who are writers, they should be very careful about not perpetuating myths such as that people who are kinky are also mentally ill, because that is absolute bullshit. They are not a correlation. They do not come together. And yeah, so minor rant. On the whole, this book, is it worth reading? If you've read 50 Shades of Grey, all three of them, you might find it interesting where Grey was coming from in some of those situations, and how he felt through the whole thing. I think that's an interesting character development if you're interested in that. If you didn't like, and yes, there are sex scenes in here in case you're wondering, are they any more physically possible than the ones in 50 Shades of Grey? Probably not. That's not the point. So if you liked 50 Shades of Grey, or you read it and you want to know more, then this is probably something to read. If you think that it's a book about an abusive relationship and that you shouldn't read it, then you shouldn't be reading Mills and Boons either, because if you read a lot of those, you will find that there is a lot of what people could class as abuse in those books, and everybody loves them. This is just slightly further along, a little bit more graphic in some of the things that happens. And yeah, so is it a book for everyone? No, it is not a book for everyone. Is it mummy porn? No. No, it's not mummy porn. The number of people I've heard who've said that 50 Shades of Grey is middle-aged woman porn, no, it's actually not. Middle-aged women porn is the more graphic Mills and Boons books, quite frankly. Anyway. Yeah. Out of 10, I would probably give this maybe a 4. It's not the best book I've ever read. Certainly not the worst. I have read worse than this. I think probably for me the reason I don't completely hate it too is that her writing style is a lot like Stephanie Meyer's, and apparently my writing style is very much like Stephanie Meyer's. I quite enjoy reading books that sound like somebody's thinking as they're reading it. Like how I talk is how the book is read and how it's written. That kind of works for me, but then I like all sorts of books. So yeah, probably a 4 out of 10 for this particular book. So that was my review on Grey by E.L. James. Leave me a thumbs up if you like review type videos of stuff that's not makeup or nail polish related. Leave me a comment down below. I try to respond to all comments, and subscribe if you want to see more. And I'll see you in my next video. See ya!